Welcome to our webinar. This is sponsored by NAGAP, the Conference Planning Committee, and also our online learning chair, Marcus Hanscom, has joined us. He is the founder of the New England GAP, one of our chapters, and he is also the chair of the webinar or online learning community for NAGAP. My name is Linda Horisk. I am on the Conference Planning Committee for NAGAP for our conference this year in April in Orlando, Florida. And I also serve on NAGAP's Education Committee and am involved with two of the chapters of NAGAP, JGAP and New York GAP. And so with that, we'd like to welcome you to our webinar today called Conference Presentation 101, Best Practices to Engage a Graduate Enrollment Management Audience. And just to give you a little rationale for why having a webinar this year, based on feedback that we get after the annual conference each year, which we do a survey of our conference attendees, and then also some of the anecdotal kinds of comments and suggestions that we get from our attendees, as well as from presenters and panelists. We want to be really sure that we are giving all of our attendees exactly what they want and that they're knowledgeable coming into the conference about the kinds of presentations that they want to go to. And what we hear time and again is that what our attendees for our conference really want is takeaways. How can I apply this back at my school? They want what they hear and learn about to be very clear, concrete takeaways or assignments, or some kind of new activity or new kind of procedure or new tool that they can use in their own offices. We also know a lot about how people learn. So what we've been doing with the Education Committee and the Conference Planning Committee is really taking a look at what our participants want, but also how people best learn. And we know that because of brain research, that we know that people learn best when they are able to make meaning and when there are connections. So with all of that in mind, we'd like to take you through some steps today and some tips for presentations, and also to share with you, if you're looking at the screen right now, you'll see the branding that we would like you to use in your presentation, in your PowerPoint presentation. Should you choose to use them, we will be sending out within the next day to you the templates that you can use, and that way there will be opportunities for the NAGAP branding, but also for you to insert your own logos, and so that you can brand whether it's your institution or whether it is perhaps the company that you represent as well. Okay, with that being said, we're going to get started, and within some of these slides, these will be ones that you would incorporate into your PowerPoint as well.
And good afternoon, everybody. I just want to throw one thing in there. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see there's a questions box. So if you have any questions for us as we go along, or when we get to the final portion of the webinar where we have a questions section, feel free to ask any questions in that box. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, and so you can see here that it's important for you to have in your PowerPoint presentation an agenda slide so that you can give a very, very brief overview to your audience about what you're going to be covering in your presentation. Okay, we need to have the first slide there. There we go. We're back to it there. Sorry about that. And so what we'll be talking about today will be information for presenters, guidelines, what we call takeaways. And those would be the concrete examples of how your presentation attendees can put into action some of the things that you are talking about. So that's going to be a key part of our presentation and what we hope will be with yours as well.
All right, so I'll just tell you a little bit about information for you as a presenter going forward. As Linda mentioned, we do have this PowerPoint template with, you'll see there the layouts are different. So if you have a slide that has an image on it versus a slide that you just want to be blank and maybe just a quote in the middle or something, we do have a template that's set up for you to be pretty dynamic with what you'd like to use. There is a question here asking, there was one presentation, I'm sure there will be others, that were prepared using Prezi. That's totally fine. So please feel free to use Prezi if you'd like to. We certainly encourage folks to use that if you'd like. And if you haven't used Prezi before, it's definitely something to look into. It's a little bit more dynamic presentation tool, but requires some getting used to. So we'll be happy to help you with any questions you have related to that. by April 15th, you'll notice in the letter that you received from NAGAP that you must submit your PowerPoint presentation on the Presys site. There's a special link for that, and you can log in and upload your PowerPoint there. Please keep in mind that if you have any updates to your PowerPoint, you can bring a new PowerPoint to the room with you once you are going to present. Just bring that on a USB flash drive, and we can load that for you right in the room. Also keep in mind that if you're using any sort of video files, unless you're linking to a website and you have internet in your room, and there is not Wi-Fi available for our attendees in the meeting room. So keep that in mind, that unless you requested internet as part of the proposal process, internet will not be available, unfortunately, so be sure that you're aware of that. So for those of you that did request it, internet will be available for you, and you can link off to, say, a video or anything that's on the web if you wanted to use web resources. If you are planning to use a video and you do not have internet in your room or did not request it, be sure to have that video as a video file, so like a QuickTime movie file or a Windows Media video file, and that has to be brought with you on the flash drive to the room when you present, and then we'll have to make sure that you can run it from the PowerPoint. PowerPoint does not automatically save videos embedded into the PowerPoint itself, so you have to provide the video file. So make sure that you have that if you're planning to use any video in your presentation. But also remember, you must register for the conference. You are required to register for the conference as a presenter. Unfortunately, it's not something that's done for you or provided to you, so make sure that you register if you have not done so already. And also be aware that we did fill the hotel for at least Tuesday night, and some of the other nights are very tight at the Gaylord, so be sure to check on our website. We do have some alternative hotel arrangements available for you. So I want to talk about a couple of things with successful presentations, and Linda and I have both presented at NAGAP before, and some of you may have seen some of our sessions. What you want to first do is give some context to where you're coming from. Obviously, NAGAP is full of members that are from small private institutions, large public institutions, for-profit institutions, so it helps to give some context to provide who you are. So talk about who you are, talk about your credibility, of course, and things, you know, if you have 20 years experience in the industry, talk about that so people know that that's why you're there speaking to them that day. Talk about what your institution does, talk about your size. I know it's very helpful for me to talk to other institutions of similar size to my own, so I like to know from what context they're able to be putting some of these things into play that they're doing. They're helping the recruitment efforts, for instance, or helping with retention, that those are things that are happening at a school that's 2,000 students versus 10,000 students at a large public institution. You also want to give some context for where you're heading with your presentation. Now, keep in mind you have about an hour or so, if I remember correctly, in the agenda, so pay attention to that. You obviously want to rehearse and find out how long of time that you're going to need. But give people an overview of what you plan to cover so that everybody has an understanding of, okay, this is where we're going. And have a clear idea of where there's a beginning, middle, and an end. I always think about a plot of a story you're trying to tell. There's always a conflict somewhere and a resolution of that conflict. Think about how you're going to tell a story of and build upon the data that you're providing or the suggestions that you're providing, so that there's a clear kind of pathway, so that by the time you get to the end, you've built upon knowledge that you learned in the foundations of the early part of the session, and you have learning objectives to take home with you. So it's very important, as Linda alluded to, that when you're going to a session, I can speak from my own experience. I go to sessions, and I've often heard these kind of biographical sketches, basically, that people are providing, just saying, this is what we did. But they aren't giving us necessarily clear takeaways of how we can implement that on our campus or how change was happening on their campus because of a certain initiative. So those things are very important, so that because you want people to come away from your session and go, I really got a lot out of that, or I can take something back to my office tomorrow and it's actionable. We've all been in the situation where we go to all these sessions at the conference and then we come back and then we just get right lost into the whole spin of catching up on what we missed while we were out, but then going right forward into our own regular jobs, and we forget about all the things that we wanted to do, and we come back so energized from NAGAP, and I always love that. But then when I come back to my office, I get so caught up in things that I never get a chance to revisit what I learned. So the easier that you can make these takeaways or assignments, I always make assignments. I like the that's kind of the teacher part of me, I suppose, that I send people home with homework. And they are things that you could literally go to your office and do on the first day that you're back, and they can make actionable change in your recruitment efforts. That's how I've chosen how to do my sessions. But you want things that people can remember how to do, that they're easy to implement, and they're something that don't take a lot of time and effort and resources, that you don't have to organize 20 people to sit in a meeting and come up with an idea on how to do it. So the more that you can provide that are things that people can think about the day they get back or within a few days or weeks after they get back, they're more likely that action can be taken. You don't want to give something that people think it's a huge undertaking, I'll never get to it, and then it just automatically gets slid to the side. So you want to give something people that have actionable items. Also give people an opportunity for engagement with you. Even if you start your presentation, and we have some video resources that we'll provide to you at the end of the session that you can go back and look at later. But take an opportunity to maybe learn a little bit about your audience. Say how many people here are from small private schools, how many are from large public institutions, how many are recruiting for doctoral programs. So find a little bit about your audience, and if they're already engaged then, and then you're able to, it kind of serves a twofold purpose. You're making sure people are awake and they're engaged and they're listening to you, which is great. But then when you're talking about throughout your session, you may have designed your session to hit a particular audience. But you might learn about your audience there just from that brief question at the beginning, that they are all recruiting for a different audience, or they're all involved in different job responsibilities than what you are trying to speak to. So then you can kind of dynamically change your message, or at least work on your message to make sure that it's applicable to those audiences. And I always find that helpful because I don't want to be talking to a group of state schools about what all the private schools are doing. It doesn't really make sense to do that. At the end of your session, as you get towards the end, you want to recap the key elements. Tell people what were those takeaways. And in my case, I have these assignments, so I might have 10 assignments in my PowerPoint. And then at the end of that session, I'll have a slide or two about the 10 assignments that we gave so that people have a recap so they can talk about that. That's a nice segue into the Q&A because that kind of reminds people what they've learned about over the last, say, 40 minutes of your session. And then you can kind of revisit some of those issues. And that's generally very helpful for people to kind of revisit that and think about what they've learned. And also provide some resources if you can. If there are any YouTube videos or there might be, in my case, I provide additional PowerPoint sessions that I've done in the past. So I put them up on SlideShare, so then I give people that link. So things like that. So when you're talking about relevant information about you at the beginning, and we designed this presentation to kind of give you a general sense of how we'd like you to go with your sessions. But when you're talking about yourself at the beginning, talk about private or public, basic enrollment statistics, your type of school. Also, it's helpful if you're talking about any sort of technology or marketing or social media, talk about what products you're using. You don't want people coming in and expecting to hear about LinkedIn if you're talking about advertising on Facebook. Or if they need to put context into what CRM they're using, and you're only on one vendor and they're on another one or considering a different one, it's helpful for them to just get an idea of how you're using those systems and how they can maybe be successful using those same systems as well. And then any services and things that you're getting as well will be very helpful.
And now just to talk a little bit about the learning objectives for your presentation. When you originally submitted your proposals, you were asked to cite learning objectives. And so we also provided you with a list of action verbs for learning objectives and kind of gave you a model for how to set these up. And then the conference planning committee, there were some of us who did go back into Precis and did some editing to make sure that the learning objectives were all written correctly. So what I would suggest that you do would be to go back into Precis using your login information and review your learning objectives just to see if any changes were made so that when you import these back into your presentation tool, you'll be on the same page with what was updated in Precis. Make sure that your learning objectives are clear and easy to understand, as Marcus mentioned before, that they are actionable, something that someone can take away and put into action. We also found that what our participants in our conference really like is they love data. For example, if you bring on a new marketing tool of some sort. A lot of times the presenters will talk about, well, this is what we did, this is what we went to, and we've been using it for a year. And so try to provide some kind of data about the changes that you saw or the improvement, or the increase in yield, or the increase in the number of prospects, those types of things. Here's what we were seeing about the change that we made. We find that that really enhances the credibility of the presentation, and once again adds to just the depth that somebody's going to take away from your story. And so keeping the, using some kind of data, having examples of how your ideas were put into practice will be a very, very important thing for our conference and for the attendees as well. And so just some general do's and don'ts, and some of this will echo some of the things that Marcus talked about earlier, and that is you really have to find the balance between using your slides as notes or your slides as a script or a teleprompter. And so indeed, you're probably saying, oh, well, sure, Linda and Marcus, look at how many bullet items you have on your PowerPoint right now. We really debated that because what we wanted to do was to have enough in here where we can send this out later on. This will be available for people, other people who weren't able to attend today. So for us, that's what it was all about. You'll also have the opportunity after the conference to upload a more detailed version of your presentation. So if you want to go along with the less is more as far as text on your slides during your presentation, you can do that, but then know that you can upload a different version later on so that people can have more depth to the presentation. Also keeping in mind that a 28-point font is usually a general rule. You want to make sure that people can see the print. These conference rooms are generally, they're long. They can see anywhere from 50 to about 100, 120 people. So we really try to get as many people in the room as we can, but then also keep that in mind with your presentation as well. Another caution that we have for you is to be very careful about copyright laws for text and for images, making sure that anything you grab from the internet is not copyrighted from someone else, because if you then take this and post it on SlideShare or something like this, we don't want anybody to run into any kind of a problem. And then this is what a typical takeaway slide might look like for you, and please feel free to use this. This will be in the template that we do send to you. These are probably your most important slides. As Marcus was saying before, this is the homework piece. He mentioned the teacher in him. Well, guess what? You have two teachers doing this, two former teachers doing this presentation today, so you're getting a lot of this education talk, but we're hoping that it's going to be helpful to you when you do your presentation as well. So what we did here is we created some actual takeaway aspects from our presentation, and then you can model what you do for your presentation as well. So for us, it's integrate images, create a PowerPoint or a Prezi presentation based on the guidelines. Remember that you should practice your presentation alone and with an audience. Time yourself, making sure, obviously, that you're going to leave time for some kind of Q&A. Get feedback as well, and then edit and improve. So your next steps and takeaways slide would look similar to this one.
And actually, if you don't mind, I'm just going to throw one thing in there. With my assignments that I've done at with some of my sessions, I usually list the assignment, and I give kind of a framework on how that assignment, if there's kind of details about ways that it can be done, or I try to give kind of some context on how it can be most easily implemented at an institution. And then that second piece, you see there's a second primary bullet there for next steps, that there can often be follow-up depending on what you're providing. And it's important to note, too, that you may or may not be, you may be providing data. I know a lot of sessions, I'll give an example, for instance, Raul from West always gives a fantastic overview of what the newest recruitment efforts are like, or recruitment numbers are like out of India and China. So his session is almost always just data-driven. It's about providing us with information about what's going on in India. So he might have a takeaway slide that's like, the numbers of Indian students coming to educational institutions in the United States over the next 5 to 10 years is expected to decline by 5%. I'm just making that up. But that might be the key takeaway for him. So there won't be necessarily an assignment he can make for that. So this isn't something that you have to come up with something that people have to go do. But your data, make sure that you're framing it in a way that's a key takeaway and something that they can use. And then you might have a next steps piece where you might give suggestions for how on their campus somebody can go and follow up about the effectiveness of a certain initiative, or find out how that data is impacting your work. So that's an important piece, just so people know how they can frame the follow-up and how they can test the effectiveness of it. And a couple of the technical things that we wanted to talk about, particularly with PowerPoint and with Prezi for that matter, we can tend to get, and Prezi is a little bit heavier on the images side, but we can tend to get very reliant on visual aids. And that's really what PowerPoint's designed to do. You don't want it to be reading a book off a slide, as Linda was talking about. So you definitely want to use images if you can, if there are ways to reinforce that. And for me, that's graphs and charts and things. It might be pictures of our CRM or emails and things. So that's how we use it. And you can use it in any way that you can. But be sure that you're using images that really enhance your PowerPoint and are things that people can see. Because unless they're watching it back on a webinar format like this, where they've got a nice screen right in front of them, oftentimes they're sitting in the back of a room and they're 50 rows back and they're trying to read what's on your screen. So you need to avoid using images that have small text in them, especially if you have a lot of data and that data is important to what you're talking about. Make sure that it's something that people can see. If you have images with text and you need something to see, somebody to see something, and you need to see kind of the full-size image with the text on it for context, give your audience an opportunity to see that more up close. So if you can provide a zoom in using an animation, and I'll show that in a moment on how you can do that, that's very helpful. Be mindful of the fact that not only they're far from the screen, people have different reading abilities and things, so the higher the contrast you have, the better. So you see here we have a white background with black text. That's about as high contrast as you can get. But definitely avoid using colors that are too close, that are tough to see. And again, we are providing this template to you, so if you want to use this, we're certainly encouraging you to consider doing that. And the text and all that is built in so that you can just type right into the slides and it'll give you that high contrast. But think about that with your images as well. If it's tough to see from afar, it's generally something you shouldn't be using. Make sure you're using images that are relevant to your content. It's generally not accepted practice to use clip art anymore. That was really the old PowerPoint. So when you're using images now, use something that's relevant to what you're talking about. I've seen people put personal photos up on their PowerPoints, like of their family or their dogs and things, and it might be good for a chuckle and things, but it's not a very good practice for professional PowerPoints that you're giving at a conference. So avoid using things that aren't relevant to what your content is in your PowerPoint. Avoid images also that may not be politically correct. I haven't seen this too much, but I've seen a few times where somebody puts something up that just because of the audience, I mean, you have audience that the demographics are widespread. So just keep in mind that you could be putting something up that might be politically sensitive, particularly if you're talking about international students, those kinds of things. There are things that you should just be thinking about because you're presenting to an audience that's so varied. If your image does not fill about a quarter of the slide, I generally say stay away from it. It's really something that, if it's something that really adds to the context of your PowerPoint, make one slide that's just the image and talk about the image. Because the primary purpose of your presentation, and this is important, is that you're presenting to the group that's sitting there in the room at NAGAP. This isn't designed to be something that people are, although people will certainly look it back on the PreSys site later or something, or they might print it out. But your primary purpose of giving this presentation is to be giving information and conveying information to the 100 or so people sitting in front of you at the conference. So make sure that you are providing things there that they're taking in as context and that's helpful. You don't need to put a tiny little image and then all this text to try to do that. You're using your words and what you're speaking about to really talk about it. So using an image that fills up the whole screen and then you discuss what that image is about, that's a little bit more powerful to a group that you have right in front of you. So I mentioned that zoom in piece. So here I took a piece, here's the inquiry form for Fordham's Graduate School of Education. So if you're going here and say I wanted to display, this is how we do an interest page. In 2013, this is what an interest page should look like. So I might show this, just so you see generally what the whole page would look like. But to somebody in the back, they're not going to be able to see any of those, the names of the fields that you're asking for, like full name and things. So then what you can do is create a separate image that's then zoomed in, because you see this is much clearer. So you have if you wanted to show something specific from that page, you could create this separate image. It's very easy to do within PowerPoint. I'll just tell you quickly the best way to do that. If you say you're taking a screenshot where you'd use print screen on your keyboard, that captures what's on your computer screen, and then you can paste that in PowerPoint, and it pastes it as an image. In the picture tools on PowerPoint, you can crop that and move it around all you'd like. But if you have, say, that first image that I showed you, so I'll go back to that. That was just a print screen that I took, and I just cropped out the other garbage around it, so I was just showing the interest page. So this was the whole image, and I put that there. What I essentially did was I took this and I made a copy of it, so I essentially had two of these images, and I cropped the second image to only include this information that you see here. So then I had a smaller just piece of that first image. And all I did was resize it so it filled the size of the slide, and now I have a large version of that. Now if you're doing print screen and you're having something that you really zoomed in on and you really try to blow it up, you might distort it a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind, that it might look a little distorted when you make it big like that. Fortunately, this works out pretty well, so it's pretty clear for everyone. But this is a very easy way to zoom in on content that might be helpful to your audience. Now, similarly, I did a presentation recently, and I was talking about these new program interest forms that we have at the University of New Haven. And I wanted to show two important pieces. One is the URL, and the other is the form. So the URL, if you were just looking at that first image, you can't really see that from the back of the room. So I zoomed in on that just piece, and I circled the pieces that were very important. And I used just the drawing tool in PowerPoint. So I brought that up and zoomed that in. And similarly, I brought in the form, and I zoomed that in, so that was a much easier, much clearer thing to see. So now that the entire audience could see what we were asking. So just some easy ways to kind of show what people are doing with images. Now we won't, let's see, we're about 2:30. I guess we can show the video here. There's a good video, and again, we'll be providing this PowerPoint to you. And I'm going to have to, unfortunately, put my phone up to the speakers because audio doesn't translate well over GoToWebinar. But for video and animation, I talked a little bit about it earlier on. But if you want to put a PowerPoint in your video, or a video in your PowerPoint rather, you need to link to it on the web. So like a YouTube link like I have here. Or you can host it within your PowerPoint, but you have to have the video as a separate file, as I mentioned. So make sure you bring that on a USB. And again, it's very important that you are showing something that's relevant to your content. And oftentimes I've seen videos that people play, and they're relevant to the content, but they require that the audience really pay attention so deep that you have to wrap your head around it with 100% attention and really try to understand the connection with the content of the PowerPoint. And while it's still relevant, it's making your audience really have to work to make that connection between the relevancy. So think about using, if you are using any video, use something that's very relevant and easy for your audience to understand. So let me jump out. I'm going to try to play this video for you. And Linda, just let me know if you guys have any trouble hearing this, and I'm going to turn up my audio.
Around the world every day, thousands if not millions of people give presentations. Some are great and have a powerful impact on their audiences. Others, well, let's just say they're works in progress. This is Powerful Presentation, simply stated. Meet Jim, an aspiring professional trying to make it in the world. Jim used to give presentations like just about everyone else knew. PowerPoint was his tool of choice. He'd use it like an outline, with a header followed by bullet after bullet, and sometimes even sub-bullets. When he wanted to be fancy, he'd add what usually turned out to be an ineffective chart, or sometimes a table. And when Jim wanted to really spice things up, he'd add, yep, clip art. Unfortunately, Jim's approach would often confuse and bore people. This was a problem because he had important things to say, and because it was dimming his prospects for success. Fortunately, Jim learned a better way and didn't stand in dark for long. Perhaps most importantly, he now focuses on the story he wants to tell. In doing so, he tries to follow a simple structure with a clear beginning, middle, and end that links together his various points and builds to his conclusion. When formulating his story, Jim uses a simple pad of paper or sticky notes. Staying low-tech at this stage helps him think more creatively and stay outside the box. He then considers what will best help him tell his story. Jim sometimes opts to use a whiteboard, flip charts, handouts, or even no props at all. When it makes sense for him to use PowerPoint, he tries to remember the adage that sometimes less is more. He doesn't dumb down his presentation, but he does try to limit each slide to one key idea. Or, depending on the content, he sometimes builds an idea incrementally, so it's easy to follow. He always looks for visual ways to tell his story, with supporting images, minimal text, and clear charts and graphs. Sometimes he uses quotes, but he tries to remember that people can't read his slides and truly listen at the same time. Jim still uses plenty of text to help him remember what he wants to say, but he hides it in his notes that only he sees. Jim's new approach takes more time, energy, and rehearsal. It's been well worth the effort. His audiences are now much more engaged and better understand and remember his presentation. And, as if that weren't enough, his pocketbook doesn't mind either. This has been Powerful Presentations, simply stated.
All right, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of just some of the things that we've been, of course, reinforcing a lot of what we've discussed over the past half hour or so. But you can also, we will send this template. You can rewatch this video, and then we have several others at the end that you can also take a look at later on. So definitely great resources for you.
And then just to reiterate some of the things we've talked about engaging your audience. We know that sometimes presenters really want to do a presentation, but they might be a little bit leery of speaking to large groups, and just thinking of presenting to 120 people might seem to be a little bit daunting. But if you're mindful of really maintaining eye contact and your body language and just kind of being yourself, we think that that'll just be really important. It'll help you to overcome perhaps any stage fright that you might be anticipating. The other thing is that what we have found is that most of our people who choose to be presenters and most people who work in GEM, in graduate enrollment management, we are all very used to speaking in front of others, whether it's prospective students or new students or applicants, presenting to faculty. So we kind of have that as part of our own toolkit. But for those of you who might be a little leery of it, just some things that you can think about doing. And Marcus mentioned before, too, about avoiding too much talking about the way we were. We have found sometimes that presenters get a little bit hung up on that piece of it. Here's everything that was going on at my university, and then that takes too long, and then by the time they get into the real meat of the presentation, the clock is ticking. So please do just be mindful of it. It can be kind of a pitfall of presentations in general. Again, I talked about data earlier, about focusing on results, successes, failures that happened as you were perhaps making change in your departments or in your schools. Be sure to allow time for and encourage interaction and discussion. Marcus mentioned earlier about a way to start. How many of you are from large schools, small schools? How many schools of education do we have here? Those types of things, just to kind of get a little bit of a poll that you're taking will kind of maybe help you tweak your presentation and progress when you know a little bit more about your audience. And then as you're going through, it's always okay to throw out some questions to your audience as well. And then, of course, at the end, you're going to want to allow some time for question and answers also. We sometimes find that when there are multiple presenters for a particular presentation, that the balance can get to be a little uneven, or one presenter takes up too much time or takes things from somebody else's part of the presentation. So it makes it a little bit awkward. So once again, the practice can help to achieve perfect. And try to pose some open-ended questions. What would you do if? Those types of things. And you don't want to have there be so much time taken away by having audience participation. On the one hand, it is good because it keeps people engaged, and when they're actively engaged, it's going to help to enhance learning and understanding. And of course, when you have your little summary at the end, that is a way for you to check for understanding also. It's always very interesting to hear how other people your audience has interpreted what it is that you've said also when you say things like, what did you learn today? And then to know that you do have a support system. NAGAP, we do provide moderators and recorders for all of the sessions. You will be able to find out who they are. We're going to try this year. It hasn't been done in the past, but we're going to try to get you the names and contact information of your moderator and your recorder. The moderator will be there. The moderator can do the introduction if you would like that to be done, give a little thumbnail sketch of the presentation, or just introduce it, turn it right over to you, and the moderator will kind of help to move things along. Hold up a sign to you. You have 10 minutes left. You're halfway through. Those kinds of things to keep you on task. If you had handouts that needed to be given out, or if you are using perhaps poster paper where small groups are brainstorming, and then the moderator can help you do that. That's why we think it's important for you to know who your moderator is ahead of time in case you have any of these extra little duties that you would like them to do. The recorder will be taking notes on the presentation and then will write a summary of the presentation that subsequently appears in our NAGAP Perspectives magazine. So once again, really important for you to know who these people are ahead of time. You can send them a copy of your PowerPoint or your presentation so that they're aware of it. Another thing that I would strongly suggest is that you ask your recorder to send you a copy of the summary, email it to you so that you can proof it before he or she submits it to NAGAP to make sure that the points that the recorder took notes on were actually what you said and that everything rings true, and it really gives a good picture of indeed what went on in your presentation. And just some final thoughts and takeaways. Again, this would be something that you would set your audience up for also. Okay, now we're finished with the presentation. Now let's go into the summary part. And just some examples here that we brainstormed for you so that you can see what an assignment or a takeaway might look like. Marcus gave you some examples before for those of you who are presenting on data. So maybe your takeaways or assignments might look a little different from the ones we have here. So something like a takeaway would be create a communication plan, review Google Analytics report to determine your next steps, create a task force comprised of faculty, admission staff, and current students to identify how you can improve yield. These are concrete things that people can do, can take away, and then implement into their practice as well. And from what once again, the input that we've gotten from audience members after our conference has really related very, very specifically to this. We want you to present something that you're going to be happy with and that your audience will be happy with and help them improve their lives in their work world of graduate enrollment management. And just some final things that we had, some of which we've talked about already. You know, what were the most important things you learned from this presentation? You can ask your audience that, your own final summary or words of wisdom and your key points. Another thing that we were thinking about was to take this even a step further and to encourage your audience members to connect with one another, you know, encourage them, you know, give out your business cards to someone you attended here with. Email us. Email the presenters if you've tried something that we've done so that we can know how it worked out for you. Maybe post a comment or ask a question on some social media tool. NAGAP does have a presence on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and so however you can keep the conversation, help your audience members and encourage them to keep the conversation going about what they learned. And then what we're doing is we're just keeping, yes, the conversation's going, but we're keeping the learning going as well. And that's what a professional development organization like NAGAP is all about.
And to just drill that home a little bit further from what Linda was just saying, remember that we're working in education here. So not only are we having responsibility to our students, but we have responsibility to those that are coming to the conference and are hoping to learn from all of us. So share as much as you can on the theoretical side, but also data that supports it. Provide those opportunities to process and make meaning from that information. That's really the new kind of buzz term on our retention efforts, is making meaning about your experience. So if you can make meaning out of that, give participants an opportunity to give feedback to you, ask questions, discuss what they're learning. understand what your data is trying to tell them and how they can really implement that in their own scenarios that may be very different than yours. So try to discuss as much as you can and then give them those opportunities to take something home and do something about what they learned. And then at the very end of your session, of course, you want to thank people and give them an opportunity to ask questions. And I would actually argue we have our questions on a separate screen here, just a questions kind of header. But I would argue that you have one slide at the very end of your session that has maybe a photo of you, if you can, and your information, as well as that being your questions slide, because then you're keeping that up throughout your questions portion. And oftentimes your attendees might want to write your information down, and if you just show it real quick and then you zip it off to just show a question screen, then they don't have access to that information. So give them every opportunity to connect with you. Oftentimes many people will have questions for you. I had somebody the other day contact me from a presentation I gave at NAGAP in 2011, so 2 years ago, and she still had my presentation on her desk and had some questions for me. So provide that information that you can, because you can serve as a resource for people for a long time and be a very valuable resource. So let them know what your institution is, your contact information. If you're on a social media network, for me, I use Twitter professionally, so for me that's a great way to talk to these other attendees and people that are coming to these conferences. If you have a website, put that there, and of course your photo, so that people can remember you rather than just, your information might not mean a lot unless they can. We, of course, know a lot of people, so as much as you can, make an association with others when you're at the conference. That's very important. So at this point, we'll take any questions. Sure, Linda.
Yeah, I see, Marcus, this is Linda. There was a question that somebody typed in about, would you review the image hints again for the zooming in?
Yeah, what I can do is I'll actually try to do a live on-screen demo here that might be more helpful. I'll use Linda's as an example here. So when I brought this image in from Fordham, and you can see that, right, Linda?
Yes.
Okay. So let's say when I went to their website and I found this page, and this is what I wanted to show. I just hit print screen on my keyboard. It's in the upper right of your keyboard. Some of the newer keyboards for PCs anyway require that you hit the function key and then print screen, or you might have to hit the F lock and print screen. So play around with it on your keyboard, but you'll be able to take a screenshot of what's on your screen right then. And then when you come in here to PowerPoint, you can do one of two things. You can either press Control-V on your keyboard, which is paste, or you can just go up to I'm not even sure where it is anymore. I believe it's in Insert. I'd have to find it again. But there's a paste function. Actually, it would be right here on the upper left, so it's in the home screen. Sorry, they moved things around. So if you hit paste there, it'll paste that image there. And so let's say that this was the image that came over. You just have to resize this so it fits in on your slide. So oftentimes it'll be bigger than the slide that you have. So you can resize it, make it smaller, put it in the corner of your slide, whatever you'd like to do. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is I want to get that zoomed in feature, because I want people to see this whole thing, but then also the zoomed in. So what I'm going to do is just copy this, and then I'm going to paste it. I'm just using a Control-C and a Control-V here. And so this image is just duplicated. And up in the picture tools in the upper right, you see that there's a number of options across the top of your screen, but crop is on the right-hand side. And if you click on that, it grays everything out so that you're just looking at your image. And you have these little black bars so you can kind of move it around. So I want to crop it down to say just the school of interest. Let's say that's our most important piece. So I'm going to crop that down here. So now I'm just looking at that one piece. And you just click the crop button again to finish your crop. So now I have the original image that I had brought in plus that cropped piece that's floating here. So I'm just going to resize, make sure this original image fits on my slide. And I'll do that. And then what you can do is this piece that I just cropped out, I cropped it out just in the one that we had done before at that exact ratio of size. But you can resize it just like any other image and make it much bigger. So, and you see here that this got a little bit distorted, so it doesn't like that piece as much because I distorted it. But now if I move over and I'm going to watch, say I'm going to go to this slide, I just want to see this. The distortion didn't help me too much, but it does make a difference. If you're looking at this small piece of the background, that's very difficult to see. But at least the school of interest now, it fills up most of the screen, and it's a lot bigger, so that font's a little bit larger. So that's a good way to make that work for you. And then you can just set up an animation on the animations pane here. So if you select that, you can maybe select that image and then say, I want that to fade in. and just say on click. And then once you do that, I'm going to go here. And so it's not automatically coming up now because I said I only want it to come in on click. So now when I click, it fades into the middle of the screen. So that's the best way to do that with the image, and hopefully that's helpful.
Any other questions?
I see there's a number here. I want to make sure that we have them. We will send this PowerPoint as well as the blank template. So if you would like to use the template with the NAGAP logo, we will provide that to you. We also are recording this whole session for you, and we will put this on YouTube. So you can watch the video back. We'll provide the link to you. So you'll have all of these resources. And speaking of resources, we do have a final slide that we didn't show you, but there are a number of resources here with some kind of tips and tricks about giving presentations, not only just in general about the conferences, but also more specifically about PowerPoint and some videos and kind of some best tips for that. So all this will be provided to you. And then there was a couple, I think I saw a question about Prezi. We can provide the NAGAP logo to you if you want to put that in your Prezi. So we are willing to provide that if you'd like.
Right.
Now, there's a question about how many people to expect.
Right.
I know, Linda, you were in the session rooms down there. So what kind of size
exactly.
are you looking at
there?
there?
So the sizes are mostly going to be like there's going to be a couple of small ones that might hold about 50 people, but most times at conferences you can anticipate that they're going to be set up between 80 and 120 seats. That's what we had when we were in Austin. I was on the committee last year as well. That's usually what we are looking for the presentations. And the rooms are set up lecture style as well. We do have a few presentations this year that are about our theme of the conference, which is leadership in GEM. And those presentations, there are a few of them that will be 2 hours in length. So that will be something that we're piloting this year also, is a longer learning session. There is in the hotel also, I know we get this question often, that if someone did want to have handouts printed, there is a business center in the hotel. This Gaylord property is a conference hotel. So the conference center is connected to the hotel. So that business center is there, and FedEx and stuff like that, and printing capacity as well, should you need to have anything printed.
Well, it looks like we've wrapped up all of our questions. So if you have further questions, I know Linda and I are both willing to field them if you need to reach us. We'll put our contact information in. Actually, we'll just add a slide to this so that you have it at the end of this template that we'll send out to you. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at any time. And otherwise, we really look forward to seeing you all and all of your great presentations at the conference at the end of April. So thanks for attending.
Thank you.